Good evening, everyone. I'm Vallabi Jalan. Uh, I'm a public space designer. I've recently had the opportunity to work with UNESCO and train as a program associate with the public information sector. Currently, I'm supporting curating for culture as a visual designer. Uh, on that note, I now welcome you all to Constructing Personal Archives finale on behalf of Curating for Culture. Before we begin, I would like to remind you all of some essential logistical requirements. The dialogue will be recorded for documentation and dissemination purposes. We hope that we have your consent for the same. All participants are requested to keep their handles on mute to avoid any disturbance in the recording. Please avoid keeping your web WhatsApp on or mobile phones on sound mode when your handle is unmuted. If it is convenient for you, we request that the participants may keep their videos on during the session. The Google Meet link is only for registered users and should not be shared with any other person without our knowledge. Questions will be collected via the Google Doc and not the chat window on Google Meet to avoid any disturbance. Everyone will not be able to access Google Doc link at the same time, so questions can also be posted via chat, but only after presentations are over. In case you are facing any troubles connecting, please find the live stream on the Facebook page of Curating for Culture. Curating for Culture has emerged out of collaborations and initiatives explored by Ishita across various cities and projects ranging across different disciplines. We are a collective of many diverse individuals passionate about cultural issues, and creativity is our hack. I would now request Ishita to tell us more about today's program, the upcoming plans, and introduce the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vallavi, for the warm welcome and reminding us about all the logistical requirements. A big hearty welcome to all of you in this first edition of Constructing Personal Archives finale, hosted by Curating for Culture. We have been really stoked to see all these responses and all your support. It's so nice to reconnect with so many of you from different corners of the world. I'll just take you into a bit about constructing personal archives and then over to the program. So constructing personal archives 2020 was envisaged as a 4-month long incubation program where selected archiving projects have been mentored in related techniques and practices. After a successful run of the first of its kind incubation program from September to December 2020, we collectively agreed to curate this public showcase. Over the last 2 months, the participants have been engaging with their own archive and related processes to meet their individual goals, as well as to co-curate this collective experience of the finale. The 2-day-long event is programmed to facilitate newer collaborations, activate unheard or dormant narratives, and further the discourse around archival practices in India and South Asian context. I also want to tell you about the compendium, and for that, with your permission, I'm just going to share my screen and show you something because now we are ready with it. So many of you have been seeing it through Instagram handles and Facebook, but this is first time when we have it out here. Just give me 1 minute. It is? Okay. All right. So what I had to say along with it. So we have also been curating and visualizing an archival compendium. Curating for Culture's first published work, self-published work. This compendium is conceptualized with an intention to memorialize the experiences from constructing Personal Archives 2020. The form attempts to speak for the conjunction which has taken place over these 6 months across the program, projects, and the people involved amidst a pandemic. So we have been thrilled, again, as I said, to be able to do this program free for public access. And as a self-funded collective, I think it was a big leap forward. But we would also sort of bring to your notice, if you haven't yet come across, we also have a crowdfunding campaign going on. And we'll share the link of that with you in the chat if you would like to support us in any way. The crowdfunding campaign also sort of allows you to get a copy of this compendium, which, as you saw, the form is actually something that you would have in an archive, is a bunch of these archival papers wrapped into preservation sheets and boxes. So that's the plan. And this tells you about the different projects and different aspects of this program. So with that little time travel from our end, I just want to take you into telling you into now what's going to happen now for the next 2 hours is I'll introduce Sarita, who is our first moderator and co-curator, and invite her. Sarita will take over, introduce our participants and panelists for this evening under the theme which she has curated, and she'll draw context for it. The participants will have about 15 to 20 minutes strictly so that we can have a much longer conversation. Each participant/team will take you through their projects and what their journey has been in whichever form they prefer. And towards the end, we would have about 40 minutes to about 45 minutes for a moderated discussion with you all involved and not just all of us. So with that, quickly introducing Sarita. Sarita's practice and research spans heritage and archival studies, intangible, popular and visual culture, and design theory. Over the years, she has engaged in critical inquiries into how culture engages with the visual, ranging from research into vernacular typography to studies of performance practices. At Hano, Sarita combines 30 plus years of working on brand strategies and design solutions with her academic training in museum studies and heritage interpretation. She has spearheaded the creation of storylines across books, exhibitions, and digital media for a range of institutions. That includes Godrej Archives, Center for Pastoralism, ISB, LV Prasad Eye Institute, the Mark Foundation, and Zuban. So we couldn't have started off in a better way with Sarita opening the floor for the 2 days of finale. Thank you so much, Sarita, for accepting our invitation, co-curating this session, and over to you.
So, hello everyone, and thank you so much, Ishita and Vallabhi, for the very kind introduction, and also for facilitating this absolutely wonderful initiative. It has been really very, very stimulating to see the range of projects as well as the way in which each participant has navigated their themes, the way in which the curating culture team themselves has collated and organized these sessions, brought in sort of a range of sort of professionals to come in and you know, put this entire thing together, and all this through this very, very mad and crazy year that all of us have had. So kudos to you, and thank you very much for inviting me for this session. The first session and the projects together, which I have sort of named Migration, Memory, and the Material, really actually borrowing from all the projects themselves. So credit to the 4 projects that we'll be looking at in this first session. And I'll just give you a sort of a very brief format of what I'm planning to follow, is that to give you a very, very brief curatorial overview, to point out to you some of the things that I found very curious about each of these projects and that you may want to look out for. Of course, you'll find your own meanings and your own sort of things that you might find of interest. As Vallabhi has sort of mentioned to you, during the participant presentations, there will be a Google Doc available for you, for the audience to type in the questions and thoughts as they occur to you, so that, you know, otherwise you might forget them at the end of the 4 sessions that you'll go through, the 4 participant presentations that you'll go through. In the next hour or 2, you will find varied perspectives on the value of archives as memory keeping in their evolution and migration through time and space, in the way in which the most ordinary of material objects become the conduits to understand the processes of societal and political changes. and how they assist in the migration of cultural memories and help in the construction of identity and a sense of community. What is actually truly fascinating, at least for me, is how memory and the material objects that are attached to them play a crucial role within the context of migration and resettlement, whether it's viewed through the lens of space or time, in fact, how they have traveled in geography or history, assisting in the continuity of identity and community. And again, what is of particular interest to me is how Mehwish's, Rupal's, Ranjini's and Deepti's projects also, in addition to all this that I've spoken of above, introspect actually on the role of the archivist themselves, and the choices that each of them have made from various vantage points of inquiry as individuals, sometimes as photographers, sometimes as artists, exhibition designers, architects, and as well as sometimes occasionally as mothers and daughter-in-laws even. So Mehwish Abid from Lahore, in the first of the presentations, looks at the role of objects in migration, both during the partition, but also from the village to the city and the city to the village within Pakistan. Her project looks at the location of memory and seeks to find ways to decolonize the object, as well as the homes themselves where they are found. Her experiments with remodeling, restoring some of these objects, for instance, there's the chunni that she spoke of, and you will be seeing. Please look out for these. There's a mirror on a stand. They all offer a way to understand how they evolve and how these objects evolve meanings as they change their material qualities. I see in this a process in a way in which the objects themselves divest themselves of their past, they kind of remove themselves of the past in the sort of processes that you'll see that Mehwish has done, the sort of remodeling that she's done. In the time-lapse tunnel, Rupal centers her inquiry around her family's memories of migration from Gujarat to Mumbai. She takes the ideas of the relevance of place in concepts of memory and migration as she speaks of the collective travels that her larger family take during the holiday season. She further explores how objects that traveled have acted as keepsakes or touchstones to bind a community, to bind a family, and to offer connections to people and places that are no longer always accessible. I kind of see the way in which the migration itself is being replayed, in a sense, during the annual holidays that the family take together, and you'll see a little bit of that in her presentation. Ranjini's project, which is called History Intangibles, with its very title actually, embeds the inherent conflict in the tangible and the intangible. It looks at the role of the archives in acting as a repository of not just tangible material objects that are part of the community's traditions, but also of the collective memories that help to trigger conversations, of how the archives act as a space for future generations, but also for people outside the community to see a value in safeguarding these very tangibles and intangibles. With the communities themselves going to be involved in this exercise in the future, I really look forward to seeing how it evolves. Where Are You, Dear Tata? Is Deepti Desai's very poignant and personal engagement with the archives of B.V. Srikantan, the Padma Shri awarded scientist. She questions her roles as a photographer, an archivist, her own role as a daughter-in-law, as a mother. And I'm particularly impressed with her very, very deep insight into questions that traverse metaphysics and ideas of time and the ephemeral quality of time. So all in all, I can really assure you of a very, very inspiring evening today. So our very first speaker is Mehwish Abid. Mehwish Abid is the principal architect at the Studio of Architecture, Research and Design, SARD. She is an internationally published academic and teaches at Institute for Art and Culture, Lahore. She has received distinctions for both her graduate and postgraduate dissertations at ComSats University, Islamabad, and the University of Liverpool. Her practice revolves around the observation that the development of newly built spaces caters to parameters that have social and cultural underpinnings. She has a decade-long experience of engaging in architectural and developmental projects. As an artist, she works with text, photography, and mixed media. Her proposed doctoral research focuses on the decolonization of the modern home in post-conflict Lahore. Over to you, Navish.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just share my screen. So thank you to Curating for Culture for giving me this opportunity to present my work across many borders and giving us all a platform to learn and carve out our thoughts together for archiving. Throughout this presentation, you will be seeing a number of images of different objects that I have tried to archive. All of them are a part of the personal archival collection. This is a work in progress, hence I request you all to forego any mistakes that I may make during this presentation. It is important to give you all a brief context and introduction of this project and a little bit about myself. I'm an architect and an academic and have been accepted as a PhD student at various universities across the world. Why various? Because I'm still struggling to secure funding. For the PhD proposal, I intend to look into the decolonization of post-conflict residential architecture that shaped housing for the capital of Punjab, Lahore. For the mentioned research, I arrived at people's history, participative approach, and archiving as one of the primary research methods. And hence, I applied for this 4-month workshop on archiving by Curating for Culture last year. The main intention of taking part in this engagement is also deeply rooted in my art and architecture practice, led by intense research and exploration of methodologies through which both these disciplines can be encountered. Simultaneously deeply drawn towards the history of what shaped homes in Lahore today, the whole idea gave birth to a preliminary project to my doctoral research, which I'm referring to Decolonizing Home Through Objects. Now that the premise is set, I will begin my presentation with a small poem. The sky is falling. You leave from what you call home. What do you take to the place you will call home again? At the time of creation of Pakistan, 12 million people were displaced and about 500,000 lost their lives. This event on paper is looked as an outcome of the independence movement. However, the research explores it as the initiation of decolonization in both Pakistan and India. It is also important to note that partition is one event that led mass migration in 1947. However, urban-rural migrations in search of better livelihood on agricultural lands are countless and kept occurring within Indo-Pak region till the creation of Pakistan. Recurring wars and conflicts around the world, and especially in this region around the 1940s, prompted a vortex of modern policies. And it also created a lot of room for creating and publishing books. Books that were published for creating sustainable and cost-saving homes, cities, and sustainable ideas were developed. The Archival Collection holds the digital copy of S.M. Chishti's Homes of the Day, published in 1948, as an outcome of the urgency of creation of homes post-partition. Alongside the said personal collection also holds the photocopies of books such as Old Lahore, Reminiscence of a Resident by Colonel H.R. Holding, Lahore Portrait of the Lost City by Somanand, and an original copy of Iraq, a tourist guide by State Organization for Tourism Journal Establishment for Travel and Tourism Services, all published between the time period of 1920 to 1985. All these books further contain images and sources of immense value. After the trauma of conflict and colonial supremacy, the people of Lahore built their homes or appropriated the occupied spaces according to their own identity, their own will, and their sense of familiarity. This project envisions to create an archive built with the help of the community through people's historical narrative and participative approach that can turn into a living digital museum of visual tactile memory. It sets out to uncover and explore the process of decolonization of home through objects. Exploration of archives as primary research methods for the proposed PhD, decolonized curation, and methodologies through which visitors experience archives and perhaps exhibitions. The methodology of doing this project was initially gathering and bringing together all the objects of diverse range together. Then each object was handled uniquely. It was both explorative and based itself on principles of archiving, adaptive reuse, safeguarding and preserving cultural heritage. I delved into the theoretical frameworks of decolonization and its understanding, not only as text, but also looking into it critically, perhaps decolonizing decolonization itself. Further, each object was categorized and allotted a place in metadata after going through the drill of its archival photography. Interviews were conducted of the owners of the projects regarding information of these objects. First set of interviews were completed and recorded. Objects that required urgent safeguarding in terms of preservation and restoration were attended to pertaining to their unique conditions. The range of objects in the personal archive is furniture, serveware, jewelry, weaponry. The archiving project has also focused on objects such as jewelry, and that migrants brought as a guarantee for the better future, as a token of memory from their cities, as a better point, having some sort of money to settle down in the new cities. One of the pieces that I have in collection is an estimated 150-year-old dupatta, which has silver work on it. This piece reached Lahore from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as a result of cross-provincial migration before or speculated after independence. This dupatta has passed on to generations from one woman to another woman as part of their tradition and as a family heirloom. It holds intricate details of craftsmanship, and perhaps a plethora of research in textiles can initiate into looking into such examples, not only in terms of the knowledge of discipline, but also in terms of decolonizing the design curriculum of art schools in this region. The most important category in this project is furniture. Objects that are speculated to inform the spatiality of a home post-partition. The chairs in front of you were first obtained from the owners with their consent. The state of the pieces was documented through notes and photographs. After conducting research and interviews, their drawings were developed. And later on, they were restored in the workshop. This set of chairs belonged to Abdul Hamid Sheikh and were in use by his family. The frame is rosewood and rattan is used to make the back and the seat of the chair. Wicker is the name of the weave. And the material, the first recordings of wicker furniture dated back to 3000 BC. Victorian wicker becomes popular during the golden era of the Victorian era. Cyrus Wakefield, known as the father of wicker industry, found Wakefield Rattan Company in 1851. 1897 we see that Wakefield Rattan Company merges with the Haywood Brothers and Company to form the Haywood Wakefield Company. Arts and crafts movement in the early 1900s brings back along this popular, and the rattan becomes most popular material for making furniture, be it beds, be it stools, be it chairs, dining chairs, etc. And in 1930s in Indo-Pak region, with many foreign architects working around here, and with the blooming military cantonments in both regions, we see that this material comes here. This piece, as we've sort of categorized it as Salim recliners, these are estimated to be at least 100 years old. The Salim recliners have migrated from Delhi with Sheikh Muizuddin Bahadur and remained with his family. Sheikh Muizuddin Bahadur was the first railway chairman of Pakistan. Later, these were gifted to Asghari Begum and her family in Lahore. These chairs moved to Islamabad with Mustafa Rabbani and were in use by his family until they moved back to Lahore. They have reached a full circle of coming back to the heart of Punjab. Upon request, they were handed over for restoration and documentation. These chairs have meticulously gone under the process of restoration as per the principles of adaptive reuse. Processes of drawing, processes of dimensions, processes of actually looking into a complete understanding that where all the parts will be, it has been taken care of. In continuation to possessions handed to Asghari Begum, this is a mirror console, Zinat Ghar, or known as dressing table. It is estimated to be of the same time as the Salim recliners previously shown. This was in this state in the picture on the left. Made of rosewood with its below part residing at the residence of Asghari Begum's daughter, Samina Abdul Hamid. And the upper part was with Farid Rabbani. The same procedure of scraping off layers of polish were applied. Drawings were developed to retain its character, strengthen it, and keeping it in the way in which original use is revived, however, retaining the memory of its parting with its lower self. Mechanism was developed, tried, and tested in the workshop for the pivot mirror. Original rosewood and bakelite knobs were restored and retained. This is an image of its present condition. A little context here is important. I am basically from Gujarat in Pakistan, and my father's grandfather, who was an agriculturalist, shifted to Alwar, Tehsil Shorkot, district Chang. When these areas were planned for cultivation and living about 120 to 130 years back. Before that, it used to be all a barren area under the British Raj. Our village consists of Arai caste, 50% from Gujarat area and 50% from East Punjab. Similarly, some villages have all Arais from East Punjab or Lahore or elsewhere, some Jats and some other castes. However, my maternal grandfather family moved from Toba Singh to Toba Singh from Jalandhar Hoshiarpur in India. My maternal grandfather, Major Muhammad Ali Peer Baksh, joined army and he was posted in Pune in 1942. When he got this made for his then fiancée, Zarina Begum, there were 2 glasses made of silver. Names and dates were inscribed on it. During the mayhem of partition, they were called back home and people chose their sides. Muhammad Ali left these in his village, Toba Singh. However, later, the one with Zarina Begum's name on it was lost, and this was found in one of his relatives' house. He was then married to Zarina Begum, to whom he brought it, and the couple had this memento from Pune till they left for the better world. It is now in my mother's possession, living in Rawalpindi. Throughout this journey of mapping and archiving these objects, I have been able to uncover fascinating stories related to each one of them. And although this is a very brief account of plethora of hidden narratives, I'm trying my best to do some justice over here, to those memories, to those oral histories. These memories of objects that were brought home, upon which they became centers of the families. They became part of the identities and tokens of the lives that they had left, the places that they had once lived in. I remember this silver glass placed on a 4-inch thick shelf in the TV lounge, really high, maybe around 5.5 feet high. And all of us kids playing around were forbidden to not mess up with the highly placed memories. My second last piece that I want to discuss and show is the Rabbani Desk made by a carpenter in Dirawar Fort, Bahawalpur, Pakistan in 1985. The materials used were rosewood and knobs were made in ferrous purely on the aesthetics of English door knockers. It has been documented in its complete entirety and restored to its former glory by using locally pressed rosewood sheets with brass accessories from knobs to all its hinges. Since 1985, it has migrated from Dirawar Fort to Rawalpindi Sabzazar, then to Waris Road, Lahore, Babra Town, Lahore, Valencia Town, Lahore, and then AWT Phase 2. Over here, it is important to note down that French bureau desks became highly common in this region during the British Raj, along with the secretary desks within the cantonments. 38 years post-partition, influences and 200 years of ruling or more are captured in this one piece. From this point onward, I would like you all to come back to where I started from. And if I may suggest that these photographs are of archival value, the evidences in them are too. Perhaps it is time that we look into these evidences and understand the importance of treating objects as archival material and as artifacts. This is a 1967 picture of Rashanda Akhtar clicked by her elder sister. The process with which these photographs were documented included writing by the owner. I realized that my mother, Rakhshanda Akhtar, is more comfortable expressing her memories through pen and a paper. Hence, the methodology of documenting archives sort of shifted. These objects came along. She writes about this image that it was taken in 1970 on Eid al-Adha, when she had just gotten ready for Eid, and her elder brother Colonel Farooq shot it. This was shot in the veranda of the house that later converted into a sitting space. Right now, I'll just request you all to take a moment and look into the whole space that has been captured into this one photograph. And also the
Mahesh, you
idea
have,
that one...
sorry, just wanted to flag you have 5 minutes left.
Sure, sure. And I would also want you to sort of just look into the idea that when one is penning down their memories, they would want to use their mother tongues. That's another thing that I wanted you to note down. Regarding this image, she writes that this is me and my eldest niece Ashi. This picture was shot in 1971. Akhtar further explains that behind me is a wooden container that my father, Major Muhammad Ali, had brought from army auction. These were used in wars, she wrote. This was placed on the masonry such as shown in this image. With some amendments, it was converted into an annex, which was further used by her brothers, especially when they had guests over. This is one of my favorite photographs of my mother, and perhaps the structure behind it are converted into a fully functional annex. Please notice the ventilation opening and the jalis used in it. Akhtar explains that the wall behind it is of Chana Godam, the biggest ration facility of army in Lahore at that time. Please also note down the colors in the photograph that are attempts of a teenager to bring some color into black and white photography. I envision the dissemination of this research in the form of exhibits as a start, research papers, or a book publication. Moreover, I envision a platform that could benefit the rich history, oral traditions, and the cultural authenticity in this region. This slide gives a brief walk around. These objects are placed in my house right now and are used in their daily routine. Perhaps the first step for me is to curate an exhibit with an embedded oral histories in sound clips, or perhaps all the handwritten notes, etc., sketches, and all the drawings and the diagrams that I had created for restoring all these archival material. And actually to note down how these narratives have been built and how they contributed in decolonizing the newly built city, and most of all, how the migrations of each object brought yet another layer of memory into the space. I also feel that putting up a show in this space also removes the whole idea of a glass case archive. It removes the concept of curation as completely pristine and perhaps attempts to decolonize it. The variety of objects in all categories is large, and their intros cannot be covered in this talk. Some objects are covered in the form of video posted on Curating for Culture Instagram and my own, and I request you all to please do watch it when you find time. While some need detailed documentation via interviews and collection of stories, they have been restored up till now. Nonetheless, all these materials and all these photographs and all these objects need detailed understanding and collaborations in order to actually reach its full and final product. The archival documentation of my personal archives gathered from my maternal family and in-laws wishes to create a repository of objects of material memory. And I want to create a community from Lahore and beyond borders, in hope, about all these objects of material memory that migrants brought with them with the new state as a piece of their home that they were leaving. I want to further move on to create an archive built by the community through people's historical narrative, which can place this region in building the theoretical frameworks of on decolonization of material memory and how they have surrounded our space. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mahesh. That was, though I've seen your project over the last couple of months, I'm finding sort of more, new meaning in it, and I think really looking forward to seeing how you take this forward. Thanks again. The next speaker we've got is Rupal. And Rupal Shah graduated from Sri Sir J.J. School of Arts in 1989 and was awarded the S.P. Pal Shikhar Award for topping the university. Completed her master's in printmaking from Faculty of Fine Arts, MS University, Baroda. Presently head of management at Kimold Prescott Road since June 2017, handling exhibitions including design, display, framing, production, communication, and coordination with artists and gallery teams for the setup. Rupal is a visiting faculty since 2010 to the present at the Rizvi College of Architecture, teaching allied basic design and art appreciation. She works and resides in Bombay, and since the last several years, she has been collating the Kimol Prescott Road archive, and that has led to her developing a sort of a passion for archives and archiving. So over to you, Rupal. And I would just remind everyone to put in any sort of questions or comments on the first presentation as well as this onto the Google Drive link. Thank you very much. Rupal, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarita, so much for that lovely introduction. I would quickly like to extend my thanks to Ishita, Vallavi, and all my co-participants. It's been a wonderful 4 months of exchange of ideas, I think. And that's, I think, given all of us an encouragement, multiple perspectives to, form our own archives. What I'm presenting here today is, like Sarita says, a very, very personal memory of my own family and their journey, starting from the 1890s to the present. Let me quickly share my screen and start with my presentation. Well, like I said, this is a journey of 5 generations of the family, basically hailing from Botad or Bagad, which is in Saurashtra, India. A little quote along with a whole family picture. This picture was taken way back in 2014. The quote says that a family is a bridge to the past and a link to the future, which is the case not just for me, but I think for a whole lot of other families too, and for especially people of our generation, where we don't want to lose out on our history and the roots and are trying to create a link for the digital generation, I would put it that way. So yeah. What I'm focusing around here on the history is basically to do with 3 focal points in the history of the family. And the key word that links all these 3 sections is travel. So the first section here is travel, a story of migration, a history of feelings, emotions, and attachments. The second section is a story of pilgrimages that the family took together, which led to a tradition of sorts and then to philanthropy. And the last one is the story of my father, who traveled extensively for business, and how he realized his childhood dreams, which he could not fulfill as an adult while on his travels. So beyond what Sarita said, what triggered this whole idea of creating the archive is in the last 2 years, we lost 4 elders of our family, including my father. And the only person who's alive at the moment is my kaka, my dad's younger brother. And what you see here is actually a patara or a treasure chest, which you will find in most families in Gujarat and Saurashtra. This particular chest has traveled from Botad, from our family home, to my kaka's house in Bombay, and further to his second home in Khandala, where it is at the moment. It's not just a treasure chest, but it holds a lot of other prized possessions within it, amongst which one of the things was this family encyclopedia, as we call it, and we very proudly call ourselves the Star Parivar. This is a story as narrated by my kaka, whose name is Manar Ratilal Bagadia. And he himself also realized the importance of noting down the whole family history, and he started writing a autobiography. And he's able to only till now write the first part of it, which is the story of the family from Gujarat and how they finally migrated to Bombay in the 1930s. And most of the family was here by the 1940s. Just an attempt to recreate the family tree. So this is the generation 1 and 2. That's my great-grandfather, my grandfather. Moving on to generation 3, which is my father and all his other siblings. Just to give you an idea of how close-knit the family is and how large it is. In 2015, our family came out with actually a directory where there were divisions and there is a page allotted to each member of the family, no matter what the age. So this is just a photograph of the directory. Moving on to certain pictures which give you an insight into our life in Gujarat, like the family's life in Gujarat. At the bottom right, what you see is the photograph of the house, the family home in Botad. Above that are my grandparents, who we addressed as Motaba Bapuji. Next to them on the left is my Bapuji with his father, who was addressed as Baba by the whole family. And below that, again, a photograph of my grandparents, Motaba Bapuji. This is again 2 photographs showing my father and his siblings, the 5 brothers here. And again, the 5 wives. Of course, a cousin sister has managed to photobomb this photograph here. But you see the last kaki here hidden behind my mom. Just to give you again a background, this is where Botad is situated. It is, well, it's very close to Wakaner, if most people would have heard of that. We were essentially a family of traders residing in Botad in a place called Ambaji Chowk, where we had a large house, the ground floor of which was a godown, and the first floor is where the family lived together. Incidentally, when my kaka opened the patara, one of the things that he found was these chopadas, as they are called in the Gujarati language. These are the account books which the trader families normally maintained in business. And while none of us would really understand the style of writing or what it actually means, I think most families from Gujarat who are into business at some point would find these kind of chopadas. I think a lot of families to date actually follow this system of maintaining accounts against the digital method that is used today. These books, like you see here, are almost 70 to 80 years old. Moving quickly further, while the business for a long time was very successful, there came a time that there was a sudden loss, and overnight the family had to declare bankruptcy. And incidentally, they had to flee from Botad to Chotila to avoid, because they really had no money to pay off all the debts. So here in the maps, I'm trying to just chart out the route that the family took. Then came those days of hardships where my Bapuji actually rolled 1,000 BDs a day to earn ₹3. ₹3 today, we would not even want to think what it would mean, what it would get us. And Motaba, to sort of supplement that income, would extract cotton from the seeds to earn 10 rupees a day. So collectively, the family lived or survived on a meager sum of ₹13 per day. I'm just talking about this to highlight how the value of currency has changed over the years and how the style or standard of living has changed today in the world that we live in. Just because the family found it difficult to support the entire family of 8, my father and his elder brother were sent to Palitana to a Balashram to study, and that Balashram to date exists in Palitana. Whereas the eldest brother, or the eldest son, which is my kaka, was sent to Wakaner. Incidentally, neither Chotila nor Botad had a school beyond the primary school. So if one had to study, they had to go to Wakaner, where there was a school which was till the 10th, or what was called matriculation. He managed to finish the matriculation there. I would like to stop here in between to talk about how Bapuji, who had only actually studied till the 2nd standard, saw how important education was. And in those days, there were schools only for boys. There were no schools for the girl child, at least in Botad and Chotila. And it was Bapuji who took the very bold step of, proposing that he will send his daughter, that's my aunt Leela Bain, to school. And that kind of encouraged a few other people in the community to also send their girls. And finally, it ended with there being one entire row of benches put in a class separately for the girls to attend, and sit on. So that was in a way a landmark decision. This is a small oral history recording or an interview of my mother and how she migrated to Bombay, which I'll probably like to play at the end of the presentation. It's again a perspective of how education for females was looked upon very differently. And when it came to their duties towards the family, that came first as against the importance of their completing their education. Again, I like to stress upon the importance of community, a sense of community and how people helped each other. Where my Motaba's younger brother was a very successful engineer and he worked with the electricity board in Vakaner. And now he supported the family throughout and encouraged all the brothers to sort of study further. Moving on to, this is the journey that the family finally took from Botad to Bombay. As again, the move was encouraged because their mama had already moved to Bombay and set up a factory. And he proposed that the eldest brother who had completed his matriculation could join him in Bombay. So he helped him get a job. Once again, someone from the community stepped in and gave my uncle a job, my kaka a job. It was a job where he had to handle clearance of goods in the customs. So I'd like to probably put in a quote here of my own where I like to say that you can take the trade away from the trader, but I don't think you can take the trader away from the trade at any point. Once a trader, always a trader. I think that applies so much to the Gujarati community. So this is a photograph of the first house that the entire family, which had by the 1940s migrated to Bombay. They lived in a joint family in a one-room balcony kitchen house. And how eventually, as time went by, and each one sort of finished their studies and started work on their own, somehow the whole sense of being in a community, what reminded them of Gujarat, made each one find a house very close to the original house that they lived in Bombay, and which was almost in the vicinity of just 2 to 4 kilometers. So the entire family at a point was spread over 6 houses, but all the houses were within 2 to 4 kilometers and in the area of Sayan and Matunga, which incidentally had a lot of people from Gujarat and Saurashtra settled there. Moving on to a time where finally the families restarted the business, where my kaka, the eldest kaka, started the business with my grandfather, and then they included my father in it. They became indenting agents for tea, spices, ghee, etc. What you see here is just a small sample of teas that my father collected on his travels.
Rupal,
yeah.
You have 5 minutes left.
Okay. Quickly moving on to the stage where the family took collective pilgrimages to various parts of India, mainly being Kutch, Gujarat and Rajasthan, and how each trip was planned carefully by the family members over a large roadmap. This brought the family so close together. There are some pictures here of the pilgrimages. That my grandmom at some point made the family promise that they'll continue this tradition of a collective journey in some manner, which resulted to the present times in us meeting on Raksha Bandhan Day, which is the day where the entire family, which stands at 119 people, meet on that day and celebrate the occasion together. This further led to a trust being formed by my grandmom, which has grown so much that today, besides the money that we use to hold all these functions, there's a lot of philanthropy work that happens. So simple pilgrimage led to a tradition, led to philanthropy in a way by the family. And moving on here to the time that my father started traveling for business purposes. What you see here is his passports. He traveled to almost 60 countries over a span of 30 years. And this is the time you see certain pages here of his visas, starting from the 1961 to the 1990s. This is the time that he realized certain desires and dreams of collecting or playing with certain items, which as a child he could not because of lack of finances. So he collected many things. The child in him collected matchbox, dinky cars, Lego sets, storybooks, and the adult collected watches, cameras, coins, etc. There was a time, so I'll quickly run you through the photographs that I have of all the things that he's collected over the years. I only have some of them presently. One interesting thing that happened here is these collections not only gave us hours of joy, but they also gave other people, that is our family friends, kids from other families living around our neighborhood, the chance to play with these things which were not easily available, like these Lego sets that you see, or these books that we had were not available in India at that point. What you see here is watches and coins that my father brought back from his travels. Some of them belong to my grandfather, some to my father. Strangely, I had an affiliation for cameras, and these, over the years, these are the cameras that he collected from his travels, right from the early cameras where one had to use a film roll to the present where it's the DSLRs that we use. So just running through the slides with photographs. There was one tradition that he formed again, which was of sending postcards from any place that he visited during his business travels. And he sent the same postcard to the entire family. He would buy a whole pack and send it to the family, by way of which he included them and exposed them to the places that the family themselves could not travel to. And to date, we all continue this tradition where we send photographs to each other. So that's in a way the end of my presentation. Ishita, do I have time to quickly share the video of my mom? It's a 1-minute video.
Yes, you exactly have a minute.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Okay. So it's just a 1-minute video which I'm going to play. I've tried to put subtitles here. To just sorry, it's migraine. Sorry. This was a trial that I was doing yesterday.
મારા પપ્પા એમના ભાઈઓ ચાર ભાઈ હતા પપ્પા મારા પપ્પાને એમાં એક સેકન્ડ મારા પપ્પા મુંબઈ રહેતા હતા 3 ભાઈઓ અમે બધા સાથે કુટુંબ નિમડી રહેતા હતા નિમડી રહેતા હતા બધા સાથે જ રહેતા સંયુક્ત કુટુંબ હતું હું ગુજરાતી સ્કૂલમાં ભણતી હતી લીમડી મૂળચંદ જીવરાજ નામ હતું સ્કૂલનું ત્યાં હું 7 સુધી ભણી આ રીતે થતા 7 સુધી ભણ્યા પછી હિન્દુભાઈ ભણી લીધું હતું અને ત્યાં નોકરી કરતા હતા પણ એક વાર પછી આવ્યા વચ્ચે ત્યારે એમને મારા પપ્પા પાસે માગણી કરી કે મને સલાહને પછી સલાહ કર્યું પહેલા તો સલાહ મારે ત્યાં લઈ જવી છે હું ત્યાં ભણાવીશ પહેલા તો મમ્મી પપ્પાએ પણ ના પાડી અને મેં પણ ના પાડી કે મારે મુંબઈ નથી જવું તો કે તને વાંધો શું ત્યાં તને ભણાવીશ ને સ્કૂલમાં ઠીક છે એટલે હું આવી મુંબઈ અહીંયા મને શકુંતલા કાંતિલાલ જૈન સ્કૂલ મરીન ડ્રાઈવ ઉપર છે ત્યાં દાખલ કર્યું મેટ્રિક સુધી ભણી.
Yeah, so I didn't want to go further into it. The idea that this is something that another uncle who I interviewed also spoke about, that while for the male members of any family, migration meant actually to plan the place where they wanted to study further and move to that place. For the female members of the family, it generally was a natural move by way of getting married to someone in another city, or then by way of they being needed as part of the family which had already, migrated to the larger cities. So how education as a perspective was looked at so differently for the male members against the female members of the family. Yeah, thank you so much for this, everyone.
Thanks so much, Rupal. That was, we felt like we were going on a journey with you as well. And I've often wondered about, and maybe we'll discuss that in the question answer session, how much actually the actual travel, in a sense, mirrors the migration itself. The travel that you as a family do every year at that annual event, in a sense, seems to be mirroring the enactment, or it's a sort of a reenactment of the migration, and we could discuss that later in the question answer session.
Sure.
Thanks a lot. The third session now is from Ranjini Prasad, and I'll just give you a short bio of hers. Ranjini Prasad has been working with archives for 8+ years. In the past, she has been taking up archiving and research work related to community knowledge traditions, institutional archives, and private collections. In recent years, she has been associated with Keystone Foundation Nilgiris to set up People and Nature Center, an archive and resource center for the indigenous communities of the Nilgiris Biosphere Reserve, NBR. Her interests are in the intersections between history, culture, tradition, technology, marginality, and aims to bring these aspects into her archival practice in collaboration with traditional knowledge systems. Looking forward, Ranjini, over to you.
Thank you, Sarita, and thanks to Ishita, Vallabi, and the rest of the group over here. I'm going to go straight into the presentation and just share screen one second. So to begin with, this project itself is, I've titled it as the exhibition itself is titled as History Intangibles. I must say that this is also the culmination of the last few years of some of the work that me and a few other colleagues have been undertaking at Keystone Foundation under the umbrella of something we're setting up called the People and Nature Center. So the idea of People and Nature Center, just for context, also comes from actually the word people. The phrase People and Nature Center has history in conservation sciences and ecology, where we're talking about a time in ecological discipline where people and nature are looked at as also very coexistent, codependent, as opposed to nature over people or people over nature. So in a way, it also aims to talk about the interconnectedness and the complexity of the equation between people and nature itself. And the place where we're trying to incubate a project like this is also the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, which is a very, it was one of the earliest Nilgiri Biosphere Reserves to be declared in India. And it has also gone on to become a place where a lot of work related to things like non-timber forest produce, indigenous community knowledge, etc. has been taken place. Keystone is one of the very many organizations working in the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. Through this particular project that I've taken up as part of the Curating for Culture, with the Curating for Culture team, it has a few goals and objectives, primarily to create a virtual exhibition on multimedia material histories. And this exhibition will also be replicated at the physical site, which will be in Kothagiri in Nilgiri's district. I also hope to combine technologies with traditional storytelling in a way that materials go on to become triggers for other kinds of narratives and maybe even forgotten parts of histories about the Nilgiri communities itself. These were some of the stages of the project development itself over the last few months, along with Ishita Vallabi and the team, where we were taken through a process of indexing. I took it up with some of the communities here to annotate and curate along with them. And right now we're in the process of disseminating some of these curated aspects. So jumping straight on the project, this is what it came together as. The idea of history intangibles is also to talk about how tangible objects can create, one can curate a lot of intangible memories around these tangible objects and artifacts itself. So the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, just for context, the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve is situated in the tri-junction of Karnataka, Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And therefore, like, there are complex forest ecologies and vegetation types that that happen to exist in this area. It was declared a biosphere reserve in 1986. And that was also because of the kinds of ecological and cultural complexes that exist in this area. What in this map that you see, actually you see some of these indigenous communities that have been marked out in terms of their settlements and habitats. Of course, this is far from accurate, because also indigenous communities are not really always so settled. Like, there are hamlets, and over time and with changes in forest types, these like minor migrations within the biosphere reserve have frequently taken place. Some of the major communities that I work with include the Todas, Kotas, Irulas, Kurumbas, all of whom speak very, very distinctive languages and have very, very different cultures of their own. The intention of curating and storytelling with different kinds of material objects that have been collected by even at Keystone Foundation itself, the intention was also to talk about the interconnectedness of these discrete objects, and we'll take you through a few examples of those. These objects could be related to actually forest species. They could be craft and traditional objects. These could be agricultural implements, or these could also be more modern objects that were created as a part of perhaps things like claiming forest rights, and maybe some of the maps that were created out of it. Here are some of the examples of crafts and traditional objects that are typically used. In all the 4 pictures that you see, 4 very different communities are being shown. All of them are creating none of these crafts actually are recreational. They're all traditional use crafts. So it involves knowledge of where to find what kind of raw materials. A lot of this forest knowledge is also declining because of the restrictions regarding forest access. However, that alone shouldn't completely change, thanks to the idea of archiving, curating. Hopefully some of these memories at least can be evoked through material triggers. There are several forest produce that also create a lot of, that comprise of a lot of these intangible memories. Like, you see the honeycomb. Honey is a deeply important, or one can say even artifact I mean, it's much more than an artifact, but amongst a lot of traditional communities, honey is sacred. Knowledge of where to procure and how to procure honey is extremely technical and highly specialized. And also, it is an important indicator of climate and well-being in the community itself. Furthermore, there are lots of objects of daily use and implements that also borrow from raw materials that you find around you. These could typically be things that you use to cook food with, to take up agriculture with, or these could also be like some kind of an innovative use with other things like leaves and other available forest produce. And the more recent ephemera that I'm talking about also includes like things that, like what you see on the left corner is a newsletter that some of the indigenous communities themselves write, and they write it in a highly cryptic language which even ordinary Tamil speaking people may not be able to understand. And these are also new modes and ways of configuring identity and reconfiguring identity for a lot of communities here who are facing rapid alienation from their traditional habitats and settlements. And last but not the least, the historical artifacts, which itself contain the Western colonial gaze, but can go on to become important sites of rereading amongst communities itself. For example, again on the left corner, you see a bunch of artifacts that are placed together, and this is a photograph taken by the British Library itself, but none of these objects are related to each other. So in a way, also the romanticization of ritual objects in a museum-like fashion is something that it's important for communities to decolonize and also re-annotate some of their own histories. And this exhibition altogether aims to create something on those lines. I'm going to be showing you a small example of some of the digital curations that are being tried out with material memories. Here, what you'll see is some sort of a journey through objects and through space, only to indicate that while all of these communities are living very separately, they're all interconnected because of the kinds of forests they share. And just a few slides that will... So the first object that I show over here is the pukhor, which is also known as the Toda Embroidery. Now, interestingly, the Toda Embroidery itself is something that belongs primarily to this community of people who exist in the upper elevation of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. It is a community that is extremely endangered and also called a particularly vulnerable tribal group. There are less than 2,000 people almost. But this particular tradition of the embroidery is one of their main livelihood sources because they've been able to manage to make it into a commercial handicraft. However, the commercial part of the pukhor that you see is rarely what is used for the ritual uses. In ritual use, it's usually way more dense, the embroidery. It's usually done only by women, and it has great significance in the whole life cycle from birth, marriage to death. In fact, like for a man, it's very important to only wear the pukhor that his wife has made for him. And there are also a lot of there's a lot of storytelling.
I will share his contact number right now.
Sorry. Okay. Moving on to the next object, we're looking at tenai. Tenai is basically foxtail millet. However, the reason I feature this prominently as a material to evoke memory around is because tenai and millet agriculture has been increasingly declining amongst traditional communities here. It was very much part of their historic agricultural patterns, and also agriculture of millets is quite intensive, quite labor intensive, because it is a mixed cropping field, and there is a seasonality associated with it. So usually while millet agriculture is taking place, the entire family would move to the field, probably even build a house there. And then those 6 months would be spent in tending to the field. There would be storytelling in the evenings. The other interesting thing about tenai in particular is that, again, it's a very important ritual use material. So it's very important in death ceremonies. It's a very important crop, especially during honoring ancestors and what they call dry burials. Tenai itself is tougher and tougher to find, and now several times you see them buying tenai, which is also something that happened post dependence on the public distribution system increased greatly. Another object that we could look at is the traditional seed banks. Now, again, the seed banks are sites of so much traditional knowledge. Seeds usually become unviable after a year or two, but the seed bank, and in fact more than the seed bank, the concept of seed saving is something that for generations and generations a community would have practiced. Like, you have sometimes like seeds which are probably can be traced back to almost 100, 200 years old, because every time they plant the seed, they go back with the new harvest and repopulate the seed bank. And it's a very shared and collective exercise. And I think also the loss of traditional habitats is causing a loss in traditional practices like seed saving. Incidentally, also women are very important seed savers in many of these communities. If you note, I actually haven't been speaking so much about the kind of spaces that we're jumping, but we're basically traveling across the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve at this point. This particular seed bank has been photographed in the northern part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, closer to the Mridumalai Sanctuary. Now, this is an art form called Ajile Bottu. Again, Ajile Bottu is something that was a revived art form, but it was inspired greatly by the archaeological rock art sites, petroglyphs as they call it, which happened to it exists around a few Kurumba villages. Kurumba is again a community, a tribal community in the Nilgiris. Now, Ajile Bottu literally translates into a tattoo. However, they innovated on the idea of the concept of Ajile Bottu itself, and they made it into a complete art form where they also found space to talk about traditional life ways, which may or may not being may or may not probably are not always being followed right now. In this particular Ajile Bottu painting that you see, completely natural colors have been used, and you see instances of millets being grown, honeycombs on the trees. Not just that, even the traditional circle dances that they constantly like they take up very often. And Ajile Bottu is also again as an object, it usually triggers off so much memory in the community itself about the way that their life used to be and all the ways in which it has changed now. Maybe one last object to also indicate the interconnectedness of people and nature. This is Simar. Simar is also also called a non-timber forest produce. Non-timber forest produce is an important livelihood option for many of the indigenous communities of this region. It's not at all an easy grass to collect because it is usually deep in the forests, and any kind of an effort to even harvest the Simar pill or the phoenix grass involves like maybe a few days of going into the forest as a big group, maybe in multiple families going together. This grass is also difficult to harvest because it's thorny. They come back, they cut it, and then they also repurpose it into multiple things. What you see in this photo is them making brooms out of this grass. So the grass is being dried out to make brooms. But Simar itself is used in multiple ways to also weave baskets and other things. In this case, in the case of something like Simar, we also know that some communities eat the tuber. They also eat some of the tender shoots of the Simar, and it also brings up conversations, like an object like the Simar also brings up conversations around their dependence on wild forest foods. So lack of access to the forest is directly related to also how some of their dietary changes are taking place. Increasingly, it's becoming difficult for many regions to freely go and collect Simar. And yeah, I mean, these are also some of the objects. I'm going to now take you through a virtual tour of the exhibition site that we're setting up. So this is the campus that we operate in, and I'm going to take you straight to the People in Nature Center. This, with the help of a few colleagues, had been developed as a virtual space tour, and this is exactly the space where this kind of a material memory exhibition can be held. And the intention is also that people are invited here and they look at each of the artifacts and go on to talk about all of the things that it reminds them of. And these very memories can be re-annotated digitally by creating smaller information buttons of sorts in this kind of a space tour. So like over here, for example, like one sees a honeycomb, one sees multiple varieties of baskets that are taken up, that are made over here. You see the Simar, multiple uses of the Simar right here, where it's woven into a longer sort of a patch of more like a mat, and then there's also a broom. And then what you see, one of the buffalo horn prototypes that you see over here was also one of the earlier photographs that I showed you, where the British who took the photograph put it together like this museum piece. Here, although it coexists with other conceptual photographs which help us understand what the object itself is. There are multiple ways in which we can, like the millets that we were talking about, are also going to be further elaborated through the use of photographs, audio memories, video memories, and multiple other intangible ways of capturing a certain collective and shared past. I think I'll end here because, I mean, maybe I can end on the note that, like, there are several social media handles and web pages that you can hear, that you can read more about the center on. The People and Nature Center is prominent on the Keystone website itself, where more details about the projects that are being undertaken or the methods that are being tried out can be reviewed. Yes, I'm gonna stop here.
Thank you so much, Ranjini. That was quite fascinating. And I think it really sort of shows, your project really shows how archives can be used potentially for, you know, political or social campaigning for, you know, either the rights of a community or whatever, or for sort of even eventually, hopefully, making for policy changes and things. And I also see a connection between your project as well as Mahavish's about the role of, or how displays are used for the archives, you know, the glass display versus a slightly more participative and something that doesn't keep the object in such a sort of rarefied museum sort of atmosphere. So thanks a lot for that, and I hope everyone sort of is also putting in their questions at the Google Doc. Now our fourth and last presentation for this session is from Deepti Desai. Deepti Desai is a photographer, presently on a sabbatical, being a mother to a young child. Her work consists of reportage, documentaries, and photo essays on people, places, and disappearing communities and their way of life. She personally loves photographing children and trees. Botanical illustrations delight her, and so does anything to do with plant life. Apart from that, she's almost always thinking about and playing with flavors, colors, and textures in plant-based food. Right now, though, she's busy mixing compost, soil, and manure for her vegetable garden. So Deepti Desai's project, Where Are You, Dear Tata, is a very poignant and personal engagement with the archives of V.V. Srikantan, the Padma Shri awarded astrophysicist, I think, and scientist. Over to you, Deepti.
Thank you very much, Sarita, and thank you everyone for joining me this evening. I'll head to the presentation straight away. So this project is called Where Are You, Dear Tata? Tata is what a grandfather is called in Kannada. This is a project for my 3-year-old son. His name is Agastya, and Professor B.V. Srikantan is his grandfather and my father-in-law. So in search of my Tata in Professor B.V. Srikantan, exploring Agastya's grandfather, his life and times through his little eyes. This is his grandfather, and this is Agastya. Nobody can do for little children what grandparents do. Grandparents sort of sprinkle stardust over the lives of little children. I personally believe that memories make for the most precious legacy anyone can be gifted with. For most of us who've been blessed with the good fortune of having had our grandparents around us, what we hold dear is the memories that we have of them. I certainly cherish memories of my grandparents, especially that with my grandfather. I shared a particularly beautiful relationship with Professor Srikantan, my father-in-law. He was a gentle presence who guided me without having to say a word ever. Realizing how precious an experience it was, I wanted to preserve everything I could of Agastya's grandfather for him, who has been a guiding light, tender and all-enveloping. Sometimes we can never have enough of someone we love and hold dearly. Agastya was only a year and a half when his grandfather passed away at 94. So while there was some overlap in interaction, it was only too brief for Agastya, and he was too young to make any lasting memories. The world knows Professor B.V. Srikantan as an astrophysicist, having made significant contributions in the study of cosmic rays, an institution builder, being the director of Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Bombay from 1975 to 1987, that is for 2 terms. His interest was pure science, which later shifted to scientific and philosophical studies on consciousness and the exploration of commonalities and similarities in modern science and ancient philosophies. But here we are today with this project aiming at expressing and articulating who he was as a person and his human side too. And on this slide, you can see the TIFR building in the background of the first picture. And again here, so this was during the days of his directorship, here with Humi Baba, here with his grandchild, which we are going to discover who he was to his grandchild. Through the course of these 4 months, through this journey, it was extremely enlightening for me to learn the various aspects of what really goes on in the making of an archive. The different archiving tools introduced to us were holistic and yet pragmatic. I particularly benefited and enjoyed from being mentored under professionals from various fields. And with this opportunity to work with curating for culture was really life-changing for me. Coming back to what I found at home and around, I had to make a start with a box full of letters, many personal artifacts, the books he read, the books he wrote, drafts of books he wrote, lots of handwritten notes, lots of things around the house that he treasured, and lots of photo albums, many tattered, some intact, boxes of transparencies, newspaper articles, and video interviews on Google. So how did I go about choosing the frameworks for the story this evening? Is I began to draw stories from photographs, letters, conversations, observations, and objects. The narratives have been broadly constructed with frameworks using experiences as a realm. His experiences as well as our experience with him. The motive for choosing sentiments and qualities and experiences as a realm was to provide relatable information to little Agastya, who's just a child, and even in his growing in the years to come. Breaking down a long, rich life lived into smaller bits that a child can relate to was challenging in many ways. Only to realize that all that remains of our dear ones with us, are their everydays. Their quiet non-moments are what we treasure most. So what does my audience relate to at the age of 3? Parents, childhood, children, travel, places, the idea of places, belongings, and certainly toys. So here we have lots of things that Agastya can relate to as a child. And here, this is for the future. What can my audience relate to as he grows up is inspirations, love, work, companionship, dedication, and so on and so forth. And of course, what did God mean for a scientist studying cosmic rays? Because that does play an important role. There are many observations that I went through this 4 months through the journey of archiving. Oftentimes, I wondered what makes old photographs so enchanting and what brings about their ethereal beauty to them. I wonder if it's the eye or the mind or simply the material or the times. I wonder if it's a voice of excesses and haste of today's times that deprives us of the beauty that we see in images or we don't see in images. I realize that there are no trivial moments, technically as well as metaphysically. If a non-moment gets the photographer's attention, it might as well be all the attention, because a photograph of that non-moment is all that time we have to offer as memory. Photographs offer so much more than memory of a memory one can have and pass on. If one can leave behind the beauty of memories to photographs as legacy, would we do it? And what would it take of us to do it? observations as an archivist. In training, the project had the advantage of being very accessible to me. All that I needed was around in the house, in bookshelves, in attics. But at the same time, it was too close for comfort. By that, I mean it was very emotional. It was a very emotional process. As I'd wake up each morning to look at the treasure of the archives, and I wondered if I were permitted to read the box full of personal letters that I found. Was I invading privacy because no one was watching me? Especially since I shared a close relationship with Professor Srikantan, my father-in-law. I was left with questions like, how do I render complicated issues like death to a little child? Is it possible for an archivist to be fair and unbiased at all? Observations as a mother, as a father, as a daughter-in-law. The companionship of grandparents with that of grandchildren is incomparable. Agastya was lucky to have his grandfather around at least for the first 1.5 years of his life. During the course of this project, I had the joy to step into his little shoes and imagine, at best, what I'd like to preserve of what's left. Most often than not, I'd end up in tears because the limitations of life itself would not let me preserve all that I wanted to. Having gone through the training process, I learned that the archive has to be accessible for Agastya. My audience, my initial plan of using all the walls at home as panels with visuals did not make sense. I come from a photography background, and the only thing that I could think of was like, have a grand photo around the house. It is not going to work because it's not accessible for a 3-year-old. And it didn't make sense because it is not play. The material is not play, and neither would it have been accessible material. So taking a slice of his everyday playtime, I figured making puzzles would work because he's exploring the medium of puzzles right now. So here is what I made with a few pictures. And he really enjoys doing this. Here I have photographs stuck on magnets, which we made ourselves, and he learned to use a paper cutter, etc. We cut his grandfather's little photographs, and he has now learned to put it in chronology as when his tata was little, and then he grew up, and then he, etc. So he now knows how to put photographs in time. Here I made little accordion storybooks, storylets, I'd like to call them. They're really tiny, and each of them have 12 images, very carefully curated. There's 4 little accordion books that I've made. The first one is called What Tata Did Every Day. That is the rituals that he did. The first one on top, you can see that he's making coffee, putting his keys in a little pouch, etc. And then Agastya is helping him to get ready for office. So I have little pictures like this. The second one at the bottom of the slide is what is called Object Speak, where Tata's little objects personify and talk to you. And for example, his dentures will tell you how they were cleaned every day and taken care of, and they helped Tata eat crunchy things, which were his favorite things, and then so on and so forth, his sewing kit, etc. Here, there's 2 booklets again. The first booklet is called Tata and Me, which is all the memories that he might probably have, or because of we as parents repeat to him. Tata was his first word, and Tata gave him his first bite of food, solid food, etc. The 4th one is called sensory experiences, because this is what Tata smelled like, and what if I have to imagine, if anyone as audience has to imagine what Tata felt like through a sensory experience, this is what it would be. If time permits, I'd really like to show the little booklets. So what are the learnings that I went through? I'd first like to share the mistakes that I made. So I started from a point where I found like really huge material that I wanted to work on, and I wanted to apply everything that was taught in the 4-month course. I wanted to exhibit all the material that I came across. Thankfully, my sessions with Sarita Sundar, Raman Sandhu, and Anuja Gunsalkar really trimmed my ideas and made me change my point of view. And I was very overwhelmed with the kind of material that I had at hand. And a top-down approach was what finally worked for me. I began writing stories that Agastya would relate to and then started filling it with visuals. Conversation with my peers really steered me closer to the plans. And how would I like to take this forward is, I'd like to think of this as only the beginning. Very complex emotions and complex stories are waiting to be told all at the appropriate time, perhaps through other tools like oral history, perhaps on a digital platform, and perhaps open to the world as a larger audience to come take a peek. So if I do have time, Ishita, I'd like to show the little booklets.
Yes, you do.
And if it's feasible. I don't know if this is a good idea, but can everyone see this? Just give me a thumbs up so I can start.
We can see it. You will have to take it a little far away for us to focus, perhaps, the camera.
Is that good?
I think there's still I mean, at least on my screen, it's a little blur.
Is that good? Sorry.
Sarita, could you confirm how it looks on your screen?
You do need to move it a little back, but just sort of, I think we get a sense of it. Maybe just open it out.
So I'll just talk to you about this. This booklet is called Rituals. So it has 12 images. So this is something that is not, I wouldn't be worried if, you know, Agastya plays with it and it's not, I mean, it's not like a precious thing. So this is what I have. It's called Rituals, and this has what his grandfather did every single day.
This is okay. I think
okay. So I'll just tell you briefly what I've been writing here. So so I write about Tata waking up every morning between 5 and 6 and grinding his coffee beans every single day, making his fresh coffee, and he wouldn't let anyone else do this. And he also had it exactly in this little mug, which he brought from Japan many decades ago. This is a little pouch of keys that he carried to work every day, and he would make sure every single day that all the keys are there, and he put it in his house. This is a little cloth bag that he made sure that the key pouch went in. Here is Agastya would crawl and bring shoes for his Tata because he knew exactly what time he would get dressed to go. This is say good day Tata every day. This was a bag that he used last, and Agastya has a memory of this because he used to crawl outside the house, dragging this till the car. Every evening, Tata lit an incense in front of Awa's photo. And these are the little things that Tata made sure was there next to his bedside table every single night. He made sure both the phones are on full charge. He made sure that his balms were there, his eye drops, and his torch was working every single night. So this is a little booklet of rituals. And now we go to object speak. This is all the glasses that he had and we found around in his cupboards. So and this is through decades. This is a magnifying glass. So the objects talk here saying, to Agastya as an audience, saying we are the glasses and we helped Tata read, which he loved to do most in his life. If the print was little, he used me. The scissors says I've been with Tata for so long, and he always used me to trim his hair, and he did a fantastic job. He cut his hair for decades using this scissor. Dentures, like I spoke about. And all the snacks that he loved to eat. Sewing kit, and he always sewed and hemmed and buttons to tears to hooks, everything was done till his last days using this little kit. And the one thing that I knew, that he always wanted a thimble to go with his sewing kit, which he didn't have. So every time we travel to various countries, he would say, please bring us a thimble. Please bring me a thimble. Here is his nail cutting set. And this is a picture of a plasticky wallet that we found in his cupboard with a picture of him and his daughter. And strangely, we found that he never used a wallet in his life. because when he was young, he was pickpocketed and he never used a wallet all his life. So this was the only wallet that we found in his cupboard, and there was no money, but there was a little photograph. This is his walking stick, and Agastya always thought it was a magic stick because it folded into three. And somehow, so the stick is going to tell Agastya the story that he never liked to use me, and he refused to say he's old and he needs support. So only in the last few months did he use a stick. This is object stick.
Deepti, we'll have to wrap it up in a few seconds if you can. Yeah. Is that it? Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah. So now this booklet is called Sensory Experiences for Agastya, because I do think that children can understand something easily when it's sensory. I talk about his eyes and the color of his eyes here, which is gray, light gray and very kind, I say. And then Tata smelled of talcum powder, and his Badananjam Mrut, the balm. Tata loved to soak up the sun, sip his juice and read books. Tata's feet were very soft, and he always wore shoes to work and chappals at home, and I used to massage his feet with coconut oil and lavender. Tata was very strong. He exercised every single day for 45 minutes, and he even climbed up at roof garden just to see the flowers there. Tata played Bhagyada Lakshmi Barama almost every single evening because he just thought it was very beautifully rendered. And he also liked listening to Carnatic music on TV. This booklet is called Tata and Me because these are the memories that Agastya will have. Tata was his first word, the first bite of solid food, playing mischief, both of them with each other, giving his first haircut on the banks of Kapila. Tata gave him the first haircut. Talking to each other in words that only they understood. Visiting Tata's office almost every afternoon as he grew up for the year that he was around, and taking buttermilk and soup for his Tata at his work. Yeah, so this is what I have to share because I made it easy and accessible for Agastya to understand. Yeah.
So thanks a lot, Deepti. There's a lot of very, very provocative sort of ideas, I think, that have come across through all these various presentations. And even though I had seen some of your projects before, various sort of ideas are triggering in my head. I'm going to hold them back a little bit and instead take the questions that people have asked. And there's just one thing that I want to say before I sort of take it, because I find at least a lot of links between a lot of these projects, even though they are from different spaces, they've been viewed in different ways. They're sort of the vantage points of the archivists are uniquely their own. But still, there were some things that I found of particular sort of commonality besides the obvious sort of commonality that's there in the title, which is that, you know, material memory and migration. One was about the idea of how have you all dealt with sort of difficult histories and difficult memories is one. And the other is on the nature of the display or the use of the archive. So for instance, if Ranjini's, by being a very, very live archive, is able to, or has the potential to sort of be involved in sort of social or political campaign, it also uses objects that are still in use. So therefore, there isn't that nature of putting the objects into sort of a glass case. Mevishes, in a sense, also by sort of taking apart some of the objects, giving them a new life, is taking away the, and maybe that bit I'll sort of ask later of you, Mevish, but how do you feel about the idea of sort of stripping away parts of the object, and then does it change the meaning? Does the object move, change, or in a sense, does it strip away of its past? Yes, but does the object also change in a sense? But let me first start with the questions that are on the Google Doc. Indira, would you like to ask your question yourself, or should I read it out? Indira is an oral historian who runs the Center for Public History in the Srishti Manipal Institute.
Sarita, why don't you read them out? But
Okay.
Later on, I might come in if there's something. I'm sure there are lots of questions. Go ahead.
So Indira has said that she really enjoyed my wishes, and I'm taking it in order of the presentations and the questions that are there. Indra says she really enjoyed my wishes presentation. She says, I think using oral histories to capture material memory is an excellent choice. How does this enable us to understand the conflicts that are often part of materials that are inherited? Mavish, would you like to field that?
It's a very good question. Thank you very much, Ms. Indra. I do follow your work and I'm a big fan, first and foremost, let me say that. Well, while I was doing, I would just begin with this thought that when I try to understand the meanings or the theoretical frameworks, regarding adaptive reuse or regarding decolonization itself, I somehow did, sort of fall into that category where I thought that probably I'm still, again, trying to understand the Western narrative or the Western subjectivity towards the whole idea. And something that's sort of which stuck with me was to understand that, when we understand decolonization, we do understand, it's literally, the word means withdrawing, the word means taking away. So even for each object, when, I was in a conflict myself, that how should I, restore it or not restore it, or whether I am doing that justice or not doing that justice, or if I'm stripping this off or if I'm taking that away. So how is it right or is it wrong? But I did understand that, for instance, those materials which are not available today, and if I have to get those materials and still, call in somebody in London, please just provide me those materials or that sort of an idea, I'm again not taking away or not leaving that situation. If I actually stick to the idea of decolonization, if I stick to that inherent quality of withdrawing from that point. So I had to choose, for example, bakelite is not available in it's not readily available in Lahore anymore. And it was available at the time of British Raj, or maybe beyond that, from 1950s to let's say 1960s or 80s. But now readily available closest thing was brass. So, understanding why it was a very good, it was a point for me to sort of struggle. It was a struggling point for me to arrive and to actually encounter this situation and to come onto this resultant that I have to deal with what is available for me, and then I have to deal with how I can actually restore it and put it into a form in which it can be used, and if I don't have to put it into a glass case again. Does it answer your question?
I would also, I wonder if Indra, I could extend that question to Ranjini as well, because there are certain things that I feel are sort of common in that, but possibly actually the idea of difficult histories and the use of oral histories is something that to deal with difficult histories or at least to tackle them is what might be common in all four. For now, I'm also wondering if I could ask Ranjini.
Yes, but I think what I meant was sometimes objects themselves have a conflict, like who inherits that? Or stories that, your uncle will say will be different from what your aunt says. So how do you resolve those family, differences? That was really the point,
Thank you so much for clearing that out. I misunderstood. Well, I did face that a lot in actually in regard to almost all the objects, and I'm still figuring that out, that which is more authentic. For example, when I give an example of the chairs, the two sets of chairs. So one source, leads me to a point that it's 100 years old, and it came from Delhi. Case in point, at probably 1940s it migrated to Kasur, and then it came to Lahore, and then another source, and all these sources are children of the woman that these chairs were gifted to. So right now I'm not in a position to actually resolve it completely. I'm still trying to figure it out, whether sources do I get more answers of, or whether which uh, I'd say that which stories seem more authentic, but I've jotted down each and every one of them, because in my position I cannot refute any one of them and just think that okay, this one sounds better and I'll just stick with that. So even with those cutlery spoons that I've sort of presented to you, so there's a little story behind it, that one of the children told me that when Mughal Azam was released in Delhi, so Miss Kamar Begum, she went from Lahore to watch that because she had a house there, and she had bought it from India at the time of partition. So when Mughal Azam was released, she went back, and it's that time that she got the whole silver ware and all the silver stuff from there. And while she was moving from India to Pakistan at the time of partition, she only brought gold. So there are a couple of various sources, and then again, there are the urgency of the situation is this, that people are of age also. Sometimes they say that was probably at the partitions, that person might know it. So I'm in this position, and at this point, I'm currently recording each and every one to whatever they are saying and however they're putting their stories and narratives up.
There's thank you for that, Mehwish. There's another question. I wonder if Ranjini is there. Ranjini, would you like to sort of talk about how you've dealt with ideas or conflicting ideas about the same object in your display and use of the archives?
Sorry, to begin with, I don't know what's happened to my camera, so you'll have to see this version of me. But just to say that conflicting opinions about an object is exactly what we're looking for in a sense through our work, because also the problem is how singular narratives about these communities are exactly what is seen as anthropological violence, especially amongst these communities. So in fact, what we are looking for is contested narratives, because they also indicate the multiplicity of, say, the way one approaches a past, and there is never a singular past. So in a sense, I think it's also about looking for some of this. Sarita, so that's responding to what you were saying, but I was wondering if you're also asking me to take up the question Indira had.
Yes, I am, because I think there is a connection there.
Yes.
If you could see it. Yes, please do.
Yes, yes. So to begin with, hello Indra, I'm so happy that you were here for this presentation. So nice. So the relationship between material memory and human memory, I mean, to begin with, the communities that we're working with are completely oral cultures. So there is no written script, there is no concept of even memory keeping in a sense. And therefore, memory keeping is I feel more of the historians fixation. So amongst these communities, I think what they talk more about is knowledge transmission. In a sense, I feel like human memory, the way they look at it, is always flowing, always moving, always in continuum. There is no past, present, future. There is only like a sort of continuous past. And interestingly, we rarely, even in Tamil, like when we're interacting with these communities, we rarely talk use the word history, which is the Tamil word for it is varalara. We more frequently use the word knowledge, which is arivu. And it is somewhere like what we refer to as human memory is how they look at knowledge. And now human memory always informs the material memory in a sense that I'm thinking even of their capstones, like their ancestral stones. Now, one cannot remove it out of context. It is what it is because people who live around it have an understanding of how it has to be looked at. And all of this today also that I was presenting is coming from primarily what human memory informs us about materials.
Ranjini, thank you for that, because that answers my question. But I think what I was trying to ask you is something that is being really contested by indigenous communities. That, you know, their idea of their memory keeping is very different. And, you know, that is what I was asking you about, that oral cultures have a process of memory keeping, which you might call knowledge, but, you know, they may not talk about it as knowledge because it's handed down from one generation to another in a particular way. And I think a lot of historians who belong to the indigenous communities now, right now, people from New Zealand, Maori community, they are making this argument that, you know, we have to look at cultures of orality and the way in which memory keepers function within that, not in the way the West has taught us to value memory or history in particular ways. So that was the point, you know. Right. That's why I was thinking that the material memory that you show, without connecting it to the memory keepers and how they talk about those materials, I think, you know, something has to come in there. That's
right. I think that's I think that's a great point, because I think firstly the idea of and I think in a sense, Ranjini, what you talk about, the word itself, the word gives a clue, the fact that knowledge and memory, you know, there are nuances in the language itself which give a clue on indigenous communities' ideas of what should be safeguarded and not, you know. So there's
in fact, sorry, just as a response to Indra, I completely agree, and I do understand exactly where you're also coming from, Indra. And I also know, for example, some of the objects that I call it objects, but actually these are living testimonies to, you know, a lot of shared techniques and knowledge traditions, etc. But for example, a lot of them have songs and stories about, like, each of these has songs and stories about it. And in a way, yes, what you see today is sort of a decontextualized chronological way or a linear way of seeing it. But in its elementary sense, I think they are guided by the way the community wants to remember it. And I mean, efforts towards that direction, definitely. I mean, it is a good point to make at this point, and I take that in, and very conscious of that always when we're working with indigenous communities.
There's another question. I don't know who's written it, but shall I just read it out? I'm not very sure who's written it. Mavish, it was a wonderful project and presentation. Your presentation raises potentially few critical ideas around decolonizing and recontextualizing an object. I'm intrigued, I'm just going through it fast. I'm intrigued to know in what ways do these objects contextualize and add to the process of meaning creation by being situated in your own home? What sort of dialogue does it establish with your home and space? This is interesting in terms of the process of inheritance and meaning creation. I'm not sure who's asked the question. Would they like to sort of, no? Should we leave it as a point and then move to another question for Rupal? Unless maybe you've got something to add there. Right.
I'd just add a couple of, I had read this question. It's a very interesting question and a comment. I guess it does actually connect with the whole point of inheritance And all these objects, as a matter of fact, I don't like completely own them, but they are a part of this family. Some of them are from my maternal side, and some of them are my in-laws, etc. Some objects are those which were actually abandoned, and then me being an architect, and I actually sort of understood the importance of those objects and sort of literally grabbed them and started my work around it, because because I run my own practice and I have been storing objects and stuff, etc., for past decade. So it was. Uh, there are still a lot of objects in this family. So first and foremost, yes, there are some objects which I have a claim on. I had claimed them when they were abandoned. But as a collective, this is most likely this is something which the whole family still, it's more like a family collective, which I have redone or restored, but it's placed in different parts of my house. How does it sort of, the question was probably that how does it, how does a decolonized object contextualizes in my space? Just a little brief story. My in-laws just made a new house, and I've also had the good fortune to design it and etc. And up till now, they were living like my father-in-law was living with his father 25 years, and until he passed away. So this whole family have had these memories with which they've been a part of, and they've grown up with these objects. They've actually seen these objects and used them in their childhood without even knowing their let's say where they came from, without even the history attached to it, but just as a mundane piece of like we say in our culture that you were born with a spoon in your mouth, right? So this is a fun thing that I usually say to my husband: you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, because there are so many silver spoons flying around here and there. But just to have an understanding that there is this silver spoon there, and then there is an object attached to it, and this and that. So when I've restored all these objects, they have actually come to their not original, but they've actually come in a form in which they can be actually used for another 20 years or another 25 or 30 years. Because this is wood, this is silver. These materials do not die off really easily. They've actually, like these chairs have actually been darbe for murghis and, for bunnies, and they've actually been barbecue grills. But now, and they have gone through that age, so and now they've actually turned back into their form and retained their forms, which possible forms. So when I've put them in this house for now, these are objects of my daily use, to be honest, every day. But as a practice, what I do is this, that I do, I restore such objects. So these objects are at my place, but there are many other objects which people take away to their homes. And there are narratives attached to those objects also. So this is how, and the question I'd like to again raise that question, that how does this decolonized object, contextualize itself in my space? It's not just that it contextualizes itself in my space, because it's not a gallery piece. It's an object of a daily use. So it contextualizes itself in my space perfectly. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Rupal, I just had one question for you, actually, and I'll also, in addition, ask one of the questions in which you would have seen in the Google Doc. I was always curious about how much does the sort of the travel that your family does, and is it, in a sense, and I asked this earlier, is it in a sense a form of an enactment of the migration? I mean, or am I just sort of superimposing something that's maybe very, very romantic, and therefore I'm forcing it onto your narrative? But I'm just wondering if there is a thread of that at all, not just in the sort of geographical movement of the travel that possibly takes place, but also in the reliving of the memories and the use of sort of maybe even things like, you know, you spoke about how certain foods get sort of repeated or taken along for the travels and things like that. So how much of that is there a reenactment of the migration in the travels? And then there is a second question, just so that we get a bit faster through it, which is from Indira, who's asking whether pilgrimages are often spaces that keep family trees, usually kept by priests. Have you come across these since your family has been to pilgrimages? So there are two questions for you.
Okay. So to come to yours first, yeah, no, I do agree with you. There is a sense of reenactment because as far as traditions go that I spoke about, there's a lot that is still carried on. So there is definitely a link, whether conscious or unconscious, but it still retains that, you know, bond to the past and how our elders lived life, or how there were certain traditions or certain habits that, you know, they had. Now those have strangely, even though we've moved far ahead in life, whether it's us or so we are 9 cousin brothers and cousin sisters, and all of us are married. I mean, my elder cousins have grandchildren now, so their own. But strangely, there are, like you said, certain food habits, certain styles of living, or certain traditions which are still carried forward and practiced to this day. And I don't think it has anything to do with consciously wanting to link ourselves to the past, but more like, I think Indira mentioned that it's a sort of inheritance also in a way, right? When one speaks of inheritance, it's not just by way of objects, but it's also by way of traditions, practices, a certain lifestyle that you retain. So whether you are in a rural setting or you move to the larger city and into independent nuclear families, you always bring along certain things which remain with the families throughout, probably. So that's where we are at. So definitely there's an overlap. There's still a link. And yeah, maybe to an extent it does sound romantic to others, in the sense you're romanticizing those practices, you know, in the present times. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was just wondering whether I was sort of projecting.
No, and I think to continue what you said, I think my whole presentation archive is a lot to do with emotional attachments. I mean, I feel it. I don't know if the others felt it so, because it's less about academia.
Yeah.
And what I didn't show here is I've already taken interviews of 2 other families which have migrated from Saurashtra to Bombay. For lack of time, I didn't. But like I said, there were certain commonalities which came through in you know, why the family either migrated to Bombay or how. So there's this strange thing where even those families, when they migrated, they came and settled within Sai and Matunga. So it sort of felt like they felt a sense of a protective cover, you know. There's a part of Gujarat which still sort of resides in Sai and Matunga, you know, in a way. So I think that's what it is. And Indira, coming to your question, no, strangely, there is no history or no family tree which comes from any priest, but purely from a lot of it from my kaka, who's, like I said, writing his own autobiography. A little bit from my elder cousins, a bit from my own memory, and of course, thanks to the family directory which we have, which so funnily we call the Star Parivar directory. So a lot of the tree that I built comes from there. There's a lot of missing dates there which I don't have as yet, and sadly I might not, because most of the others have passed away, the elders. So a lot of stories have died or gone with them. So I cannot really recreate those. So there are definitely missing links there, but yeah. That's how it is. So just a funny fact that when I made the family tree, I used an app called Twill or Twile. And it at the end of it gives you these infographics where I said that that's where I got this info from, that today The family stands at 119 people. The average age of the family is 46 years. So it's like we are a young family, and it's fairly balanced because there are 49% females and 51% males. So yeah, there you go. So it was just an amusing thing that came up when I built the family tree. But no priest involved here, sadly. Yeah.
So yeah, I have a.
It's not so much priests, but I mean, I don't know what to call them. In Orissa, the Pandas keep these books. Most, where they'll say your great grandfather or so and so visited from this village at that time, which helps you trace the migration of families often.
Right.
Because they do keep their patrons, each family would be patronizing a certain Panda family, or so they would actually have it written. But it's amazing how they have the memory of, 2 generations ago, who came and where did the family live at that point.
Right.
So that's what I meant. I mean, I don't mean the family tree in its refined form, but these this kind of information.
Right. So okay, I got your point. So if you recall, in one of the photographs, I showed these books, the red colored books. So while most of it was account books maintained by my great grandfather and my grandfather, one of the books actually had the birth dates of my dad and my uncles written in it. Of course, it's again written in context with the Gujarati or the Hindu calendar. So the years and everything differs. And but when one Googles, one can actually trace back and find the dates and the years as per the English calendar. So a little bit of the information came from there because as far as my father was concerned, throughout his life he had two birthdays to celebrate. One was what was actually as per the Hindu calendar, but strangely his date of birth in all other documents was different.
Yeah.
So we actually till date celebrate both the birthdays even after his passing away. So yeah, you are right that I haven't gone through all the books and all the pages in that book, but a lot of in between the pages within the account books also have these little facts about the family. Strangely, I assume it must be in his free time that my great grandfather or grandfather sat down and wrote these little snippets of the facts of the family.
Yeah. Thanks for that. There's a question for Deepthi. Ishita, would you like to ask that?
Yeah, I could do that. I'll have to read it myself though. I think Deepthi, I'm still amused. I mean, just simply excited because I think last 2 months we haven't seen what was happening and how things were getting interpreted and manifested. But also what it made me question through your presentation was this level of subjectivity that might have taken over when you steered the project through Agastya's eye, right? And how did you reflect onto it? And also the question would be, is this the only way of visualization which you would like to focus on, or is it the starting of it? So I'm just grappling with this idea of how much personal does it become, the storytelling.
I was very afraid that I will be louder than what I imagine Agastya will be. But I must share at this point that a lot of things are because he gave me a lead. Many times, for example, this whole sewing kit, magnifying glass, everything used to be right next to his grandfather's armchair that he sat in the sitting room every single day. So every time he crawled to it, it intrigued him from the time he understood it's an object and it belongs to his grandfather. And so when he passed away, we put his things away because many of them were things that we wouldn't use every day. But when I started taking all the objects out, I did not think of these at all. I was really thinking at the larger things like this beautiful typewriter, everything that looked beautiful, mostly from his academic and his research world. And I really wanted to use everything, those really fantastic instruments that I don't even know what they are, even now. But when I started working from the point of view that what Agastya used to fiddle around, and I must say, that he also tore a lot of things that were important while I used to open out these drawers and cupboards, and used to open these things out and used to come and pick these things. So then I started thinking that perhaps this is what interests him. Glasses, definitely, all the glasses. And then I know that his tata, for one, was the one who introduced him to French fries and chips. So then for me, it was like, this has to go somewhere. And dentures, he was very fascinated as to, what do you do with these? Various things. So then these things I would not have thought of all as in the beginning of the project to put together and go as a project in an archive. But this is the person exactly that I was looking for. This is the Tata that I was looking for as an archivist, and he led the way for me. So I must say that here I have done justice to my audience because he really showed me the way. And I do think that in time, he is going to ask me more questions. He is going to, and when time progresses, I will have to build little things for him to access and share the stories. And it has to be done soon because he's already growing out of these things. So yes, I do not know if there's any other way of visualizing right now, because I do, like I said, I do think I did justice. But as he grows up, I might color it. Is my guess, because he's going to be an adult and I'm going to be, and we're going to have different perspectives about it. Yes, thankfully there's a lot of perspectives from out of the family too. So yes, thank you.
I think that sort of your answer leads us to the next question, which I can see from Dr. Anuradha Iyer Siddiqui. Would you like to ask it yourself, or shall I read it out, Dr. Anuradha?
Yeah, I'm happy to ask it. I'm unable to turn on the camera right now.
That's fine.
Yeah, first of all, just want to say how amazing all these presentations were. But my question is for actually everyone or anyone who wants to answer. I was really reflecting as I was seeing the compositions of the things you elected to show us, and how much care and attentiveness there was in really narrating the objects. Not even, I mean, I suppose a kind of artistic narration of gathering and, placing them in a sort of visual frame or aesthetic frame. And I just wanted to hear from each of you a little reflection on your process these last few months on how an archive is different from something like an artistic exhibition, and what thinking of this as an archive does for you, what kind of theoretical work that does.
I think even the sort of work that we do, I myself do, I kind of, and I'm thankful for that question, Dr. Anuradha, because these are, when the sort of the space between when an archive stops becoming an archive and then takes on another sort of personality and a persona of either, like you say, an artistic practice or a reflection or an interpretation is, I think those lines are a bit blurred, at least in my case, but I'd like if the presenters today would also like to sort of share their thoughts on this.
Can I talk
Yeah,
about
go ahead, Rupert.
Sure. So, like I mentioned earlier, there were 2-3 trigger points here actually, incidentally. One of the things was, of course, like I said, the passing away of all 4 elders, 4 of the 5 living elders from my dad's generation. The other thing that happened is when my dad passed away, that was in March 2019. It was only my mom. She lives alone now, and that was a fairly large house which she could not manage on her own. So a few months down the line, after my dad passed away, we sold that house, and we shifted her to a slightly smaller house near my sister, where she stays in Bombay itself. But the house that we sold, we were, as a nuclear family, living there for like when we sold, my parents had lived there for 45 years. So when we started packing up everything, there were so many things that came up which none of us remembered was there actually with us, whether it's by way of books, by way of family objects, by way of, like I said, the postcards. And besides that, like I said, the third thing was how my kaka thought of writing the autobiography. And during the pandemic, I think, which is something most of us or most families indulged in a way, is that we all started digging out our old photographs. And, I mean, just as a way of exchanging notes and keeping up the cheerfulness or the mood upbeat during the pandemic. So we have our own family WhatsApp group, and then everyone started digging out objects and photographs. And that's how, for me, this process became easier, because by the time I actually, Ishita, accepted the proposal and actually started building the archive, I already had actually so much with me that I found it difficult to curate and narrow down and pick out the stuff that I wanted to include in my archive. So yeah, for me, that was my journey. And what I intend to do is, hopefully, I'm in the process of building a website where one of the sections will be about migration of families. And I'm going to continue recording interviews of families of their migration, and also invite other people to directly share their stories on the website. Yeah.
I think Ishita, we have time for one answer. One more answer, I think.
Yes. Yes, or two short answers.
Two short answers. 1 minute. Okay, so
can I go?
Yeah, Mavish, go ahead. Whoever says first.
I just continue from that point that where archive stops becoming an archive and it, sort of crosses over and becomes an art exhibition. I'd sort of, like to answer it in a way that for me, just talking about my position in this, that for me, when I was trying to look into the whole idea of, forming a methodology through which I can, understand the subject that I was dealing with, like decolonizing homes post-partition, or decolonizing, specialities post-partition, and mass migration, and this and that. And archiving sort of jumped it right across my face that this is one primary method through which I should encounter that. And when I sort of delved into this, when I sort of started looking into the methodology and its framework, I also started realizing all these objects that were around, which probably I might have ignored before. And it was sort of like a thing that, I started looking into it, attentively more, and focusing on it in a way that, it also addresses the academic pursuit that I intend to do, and then it also enhances my own practice that I do as a designer. So for me, the clinical differentiation between an archive or an art exhibition does not it sort of disintegrates for me, because just yesterday there was somebody over at my place, and then they saw Sarita, which I also showed you, that chair and the head and telephone set, which is not working anymore, but we sort of sit there only to charge our mobile. There's an old phone there, and and a chair. And she sort of just said that everything around here looks curated, and it was sort of a pleasurable moment for me. And I also looked around and thought that I don't know if I've done it intentionally or not, because it's just for me, probably yes, because I'm a designer, and we do have inherently those abilities to do that and to articulate spaces in a way. But to pinpoint one more fact, that even while doing all this research, even for my bigger project or my smaller this project, when I was encountering when I was on in interviews with all my relatives, the major question that came up again and again was, what was the reason? Why was I bothering them? what was the reason, why am I doing it, and this is old stuff and there's no need, and okay, fine, it's made of silver, yeah, that, okay, you can have it, that sort of an attitude. And it has nothing to do that that we being academics or as designers, we should just think that, oh my god, they don't know its worth. It's not like that. They're people of their own perspective. And but there's this dire need, there is this dire need to make people aware of it, of their importance. And I do feel that in Pakistan there is a lot that can be done at this point. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. We've sort of overshot our time, so I'm really sorry that we haven't been able to take all the questions and possibly listen to all the answers, but maybe the conversation can continue in other sort of ways,
Yes.
and maybe online. So thank you very much, all of you, for listening, for the participation and the presenters. Over to you, Vallabhi, very quickly.
Many thanks to Sarita Sundar and all participants of this session. A big thank you to all of you in the audience. If you're joining us for the next session, please meet us on the second link at 8 p.m. sharp. And we are also sharing the crowdfunding link in the chat, so do spread the word. Thank you.